Today, I am going to talk all about navigating disagreements with your wife. I know everybody's favorite topic, mine too, but in all seriousness, this is an incredibly important topic that I wish I would have known a lot more about a lot earlier on in my marriage. I have been married now this year, just a few months from now. It'll be 20 years I have been married. And it has been an incredible journey. It is a constant learning experience, and you're going to learn for the rest of your marriage. I know it's a lifelong process, but these principles and these steps that I'm going to give you today, had I had these and employed them in my marriage, I would have had a lot more peace in my marriage over the years, especially at the beginning when I was learning to work through disagreement in living with another individual so closely all the time. And so, the thing to recognize as well before I even dive into any steps here is it's very normal, by the way, to have arguments or disagreements with your wife. It's a very normal thing. That's not out of the ordinary. Everybody deals with it. You are not alone. You're not the only person that wants to curse. You're not the only person that does curse on occasion. You're not necessarily the only person who wants to hit something. You're not the only person who whispers curses under your breath. It's marriage, man. You're in close quarters with another human being all the time, and you're selfish, you're human, you want your own way. You're going to knock heads. It's just the way it is. And you're going to knock heads with everybody at some level, by the way. You're never going to agree with everybody on everything or any one person on anything. Everyone's unique. Everyone's different. Everyone has different needs and, emotional needs, physical and sexual needs. Everybody's in a different mental space. Everyone has a different version of normal they're coming from and expectation of what they thought marriage or, a relationship would look like. And so you're two human beings who are vastly different. You are going to disagree. It's normal. It's expected. Everybody does it. But there is a way to work through it where it doesn't have to be a life-altering event every time you have a disagreement with your spouse. And, there's a big difference, and I want to make a distinction here. There's a difference between disagreements and arguments. Disagreement I can have with you over what the best flavor of ice cream is, right? That's a disagreement. A disagreement is a discussion, or can be a discussion about, we have a differing opinion on something. That's what disagreement is. When disagreement becomes argument, that's when emotions have become involved to an unhealthy degree. That's when it's more about winning and being right instead of reaching the right conclusion or the right decision. And so the goal here is to create a discussion around disagreement so that your discussion around disagreement doesn't turn into an emotional argument where really there is no winner and you just damage yourself, damage your relationship, and ruin the day ahead of you. But pre-discussion, I'm just going to dive right in and give you guys some points on this in discussion over disagreement with your wife, is before you even have a conversation about a disagreement, before you even enter into a disagreement, number one, just take a pause. It is one of the best things you can do, one of the most healthy things you can do as a person, is to back up, take a pause, take a moment, and think before you speak or act. I mean, you've probably experienced this too. It's like after you have an argument or an insult throw out with someone, whether it be online or in person, it's always, you're in the shower later, scrubbing, and you're like, oh man, I should have said that. That would have been a great one, right? We always think of the better thing to say later. It's because we've had time to process. We've had time to think. We've had time to calm down and get out of our emotional space so that we can actually think clearly and come up with good things to say and good points to make. And so take a pause. Taking a pause also allows you to bring down your emotional state. It allows you to calm down, allows you to think clearly. It allows you to enter a discussion in a mature and powerful way. And then, of course, number two is recognize the setup. Most of the time that I've had arguments with my wife, it has been before we're headed to some sort of family get-together that's supposed to be fun, or we're supposed to go to church on a Sunday. Everybody's dressed and getting dressed. It's going to be a peaceful Sunday. And then we knock heads, and then it gets out of control, and then mean things get said, and then your whole day is ruined. And Satan knows how to drive a wedge. He knows how to pick the times when you are emotionally vulnerable, when you're already ticked. Maybe she's already angry. Maybe you're both at each other's throats. He knows the moments to pick to throw you into chaos and confusion. Make no mistake, he wants to separate you and your wife because you are the ultimate team. After your relationship with God, the most important relationship in your life is with your wife, because you are one flesh, you're a unit, you're a team. And so the best thing Satan can do to get at your relationships, at your money, at your kids, at everything else in your life, outside of your relationship with God, is to try to divide you from your wife, from your helper, from your teammate, from your lifelong mate. And so recognize, that's number 2, is recognize the setup. What kind of emotional state am I in right now? What kind of emotional state is she in right now? Is this a good conversation to have? Are we even going to be able to have this discussion, or is it going to be devastating? Is this going to end up, in a really bad situation? So those 2 things before you dive in. Now, once you dive into a conversation, I've got some steps for you that you can take to lead the discussion in a healthy way. And number 1 here is lead the discussion. Actually take leadership. Now, leadership is not about screaming commands, not just about being the boss and taking charge. It's about setting the example. It's about taking the first step into the unknown. It's about walking in a certain direction so that other people can follow you and see where you are going. And so by leading the discussion, the first thing you have to do is actually be the one willing to have the conversation. I am shocked on a regular basis how many men avoid conversations when there is a conflict. It has blown my mind since I was a kid. Whenever I've had a problem with somebody, I just tell them what the problem is. And I've always appreciated when people just tell me what the issue is. There have been so many times when I've gone to grown men and just gone, dude, you're behaving differently. What is going on? You get the response of, oh, nothing, man. There's nothing wrong. What are you talking about? Like you're talking to a woman. In reality, you've known this person for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You know they're behaving weird because you know them well enough, and they won't just admit it. And, a lot of guys will not just do that in the regular real world with other men. They will do it with their wives. Or they'll play passive aggressive and try to send a message with their attitude and how grumpy they are around the house. Or they just won't ever communicate anything. They keep it inside, bottle it up, and then that pressure builds to the point where they just erupt. And you got to take leadership. Someone has to. And oftentimes when you and your wife are at each other's throats or disagreeing at some level, you'll have that coldness in the house where you pass one another and no one wants to be the first one to cave. No one wants to say, I'm sorry. But by taking that step of leadership, you are taking on your role as the protector and the provider, as the leader of the home. You're setting a healthy example. You're choosing the time and place for that conversation. Because remember, before you have this conversation, you've already stopped to pause, think, calm down, and you've taken a look at the landscape to go, is this a setup? Now you're leading the conversation by setting the time and place, by choosing the context, by going, is my wife in an emotional place where she can have this conversation? Are we both emotionally calm enough to have a discussion? Is this the right time? Is she exhausted by the kids? Or can we have a productive discussion here? All right? So be willing to lead that conversation. And then 2, set the emotional tone. And this is part of your leadership. But setting the emotional tone is perhaps the most important thing you can do for a conversation with your wife. Remember that women are the more emotional creatures. They are much softer than men, physically, emotionally. Now, again, I know not all women are exactly the same, just like all men aren't the same, but generalities exist for a reason, and it's good to pay attention to. Most women are softer than most men, and women can hear things from a much more emotional place than men. With men, guy says something to me, I hear the words, and I know what the words mean, so I get my answer. I know what he meant to say. When women say things, much of the time, there is a message other than what they're just saying to you. So it's not just the words. You got to pay attention to the way they're saying it. That's how they hear things because that's their lens. And so when you say something to them, they think you're communicating something passive aggressive oftentimes because that's the way they communicate by nature in many ways. And so you've got to be careful about the way you communicate. And the biggest way to do that is to set the emotional tone. Keep it calm. Every time my wife and I have ever gone into argument zone out of disagreement zone, it's always been when I have allowed myself to get emotionally riled. Doesn't mean I'm the first one there. It doesn't necessarily mean that insults weren't thrown or other buttons weren't pushed by intention to push me there. But whenever I have gone there and led there emotionally, the entire argument has gone there. And when you're able to reel in that emotion, that keeps you in discussion zone. It keeps you in innocent disagreement mode. It keeps you in solution finding mode. And there is also something about not allowing yourself to be swayed emotionally that carries weight. It carries authority with it. There's some major dad alpha energy that comes with a man that is not going to be swayed by his emotions. He's not going to start screaming. He's not going to allow insults to rock him. He's going to stay right on the path, right on point, talking about the exact topic we started the conversation with, and he's not going to allow himself to ramp up. That's honestly an area where I have struggled throughout my entire marriage. I can get very frustrated at times with my wife when I explain something. I think it's simple and maybe she doesn't get it, or maybe she doesn't want to get it. And so I'll allow myself to ramp up, and inevitably she will go there too. And that's when damage is done, pain is experienced, and you start having some regret around what was said. So stay calm, avoid escalating disagreements, and earn respect through that leadership. Your wife will respect you far more by recognizing that you can't be swayed by emotion. You're stronger than your emotion, means you're stronger than the argument. She will see that and respect it. The point that I had after that is just number 3, go to the shared foundation. And this is by far the most important point, even though it's not the first point. And what I mean by that is you and your wife need to be on the same set of values. That needs to be your foundation. Your foundation for your values, your morals, must be the same. Because then you know the majority of the decisions that need to be made before you even need to make them. My wife and I have very few disagreements because our moral plumb line is the same. I know what she believes politically because I know what she believes morally. I know what she believes about the government. I know what she believes about raising our children, about health, because our foundation of truth is the scripture. And so when we both look to that, even though we may have personal preferences, we are both going to bow to whatever that scripture says. That is ultimately, we're going to submit our wants and needs to whatever the scripture dictates, because that is the foundation of truth for our lives. When you share that foundation of truth, you can't be separated easily, and there's not a whole lot to disagree on. I shared a video a few weeks back before the election where I was just really expressing how mind blown I was that there were couples that could vote on opposite ends of the spectrum. I've said it before, I don't think there's a political solution. I'm not going to get into the politics. I think both parties are corrupt wings of the same bird at some level. But the reality is, when you look at what mainstream Republican Party politics are, and you look at what mainstream Democrat politics are, they are completely incompatible. There is such a massive chasm there that is not just about spending policy. We're talking about what everyday decency looks like. When there is that big of a chasm, you cannot be on opposite ends of the spectrum and not have your marriage on an absolute precipice of disaster. If you are voting differently than your spouse, your marriage is in serious jeopardy, and you need to get on the same page. If you and your wife are that far apart on values and morals, even if it's not just voting, the first step in all of this is you and your wife need to get on the same foundation. Your disagreements aren't going to matter if you don't have the same thing telling you what truth is. It's like operating on 2 different sets of law. It would be complete chaos in society. Without one rule of clear law, there's chaos. And that's how my wife and I operate. We're on the same moral plumb line. And by the way, if you're looking to marry a woman, if you haven't yet and you're looking for a wife, do not compromise on the values and morals aspect. It is far easier to create a relationship with your wife when you guys have the same values and morals, instead of trying to bring your wife and educate her on what truth is. Look, it can be done. It's just a heck of a lot more work to educate, teach, train, and get on that same page, instead of marrying a woman who's a thoroughbred from her understanding of the scripture and what truth is. And so that's just my take on it. Number 4, I'll be quick about this one because I already mentioned something about it, but just remember, she's a girl. Your wife is softer than you are. Don't talk to her like you wouldn't talk to another stranger woman, that you wouldn't want to drive away and embarrass and hurt and emotionally maim. And I've lost sight of that sometimes, where you just get used to being around someone. That whole, familiarity breeds contempt. We tend to talk more harshly and more rough to the people who are closest to us because we think they're not going anywhere. And you just get used to saying things very strongly to people you're comfortable with. But remember, she's a girl. Remember that she is looking for protection. I have always said this to the guys I've worked with, is that your wife is really your first kid. She's the first one you got to provide for. She's the first one you got to protect. She's the first one you have to lead with your behavior other than yourself. She is going on an adventure of marriage, looking to follow someone who's going to take her on an adventure. She needs to be led and loved in a gracious and graceful way. And if you can remember that your wife is a girl, and you can see that little girl in front of you when you're speaking to her, And she'll get a whole lot more response, by the way. You'll get a lot better reaction talking to her in a softer way than you will by railroading her. All right, that's number 4. Number 5, communicate clearly and simply. A plethora of words creates agitation. Proverbs 10, verse 19 says, sin is not ended by multiplying words. In other words, a lot of words don't help anything. It's usually not a good thing. It says, but the prudent hold their tongues. The fewer words you can use, especially in a disagreement or an argument, and the more simply you can speak without a whole bunch of context and other fluff, the better. Get to the heart of the issue, deal with what you disagree on, get on the same page, and move on. Remember, this is not about being right. It's not about winning. It's about winning together. Communicate clearly and simply. Number 6, stay on topic. This is one of those things with emotions too. Sometimes, and many times, you can see it online, you can see it in real life. When people get into a discussion with someone, when they oftentimes cannot either defend their position or they're just in argument mode, now they start throwing in topics that are irrelevant to the original point. Do not be swayed by that. Sweetheart, I love you. But that is a tactic that will be used on you as a man. You got to stay on topic. Do not take your finger off of the topic you started with and don't let go until it's addressed. It doesn't matter what other topic comes in about what you did 5 years ago, what your mom did, what you did at the family function, what she's still angry about you wearing at A, B, or C, or what you said to a family member. Don't engage in that stuff. When you start jumping topic to topic, you're bound to find an argument, and it's not going to go in a good direction. Stay on topic. Number 7, bring in help for the big stuff. Look, my wife and I agree on the vast majority of things. There's not a whole lot of disagreements. And the nice thing is, because we share that platform or that similar foundation, that shared foundation of truth, I don't know if we've ever had to call anybody else in to help us through a disagreement on something major, because we agree on the major things. But if there was a major issue that is life-altering, that is, we're about to go make the biggest investment of our lives, or we are thinking about doing this as a family, and you really aren't on the same page with that, and there may be no clear answer in Scripture for something like that, go to someone who shares your values. Go to someone who shares your morals. Go to someone who can look at your relationship and your life from the outside and give input based on that shared foundation. And don't use that as a weapon, by the way, to beat your spouse or to win or to get, a neutral party on your side. Use this as an opportunity to get wisdom and input from someone who's going to help you make a united, strong decision together. And then finally, number 8, know when to pause or end the discussion. Look, I've already said a couple of times in here, remember your wife's a girl. Remember that women are softer than men. Remember how you need to speak. Keep your emotions in check. And you don't want to just railroad over your wife. This is about team, all right? And by the way, there are times when my wife and I will have a disagreement, and I will at times go, you know what? I hear the wisdom in that. I get it. I see where you're coming from. I'm not so dug into my position that I can't change. I think that's a wise decision. Let's go in your direction. We'll try that, all right? There are times when I have to surrender on my end too. But there are also times where you have to be the one to end the discussion and move on. And there have been times when my wife and I have disagreed on something. There may not be a super clear answer for us. It may not be big enough to get outside counsel on, but there have been times when we come to a disagreement where I've simply had to say, I've explained this enough times. I do not believe that it's getting through. I've said it as many ways as I can say it. Whether you don't understand it or don't want to understand it, a decision has to be made. This is the direction I'm going. Now, I have the benefit of having a wife who shares my plumb line of truth. And so what the Scripture tells us is that the man is the head of the home, and that ultimately I'm responsible for my wife to protect, provide, take care of her, and she agrees with that. That's why we're on the same moral plane there. We're on the same wavelength there. And so when it comes to a decision like that, we are both in agreement that I'm the head of the home, and I can make that decision on our behalf. And because of that authority given to me by God, she's going to submit and follow me. And again, I wouldn't just use that as a default. It's a dangerous thing. So use that sparingly. But there are times when you're going to have to use it, and you're going to have to remain stoic. You're going to have to remember to not let your emotions get out of control if insults come, and you're just going to have to move straight on. You will earn your wife's respect in a massive way that way. And so, just as a conclusion is, disagreements are normal, but they don't have to harm your relationship. They can be an incredible bond building experience. And what I would encourage you to do, if you're not already employing some of these things in your life, it's hard to do it on the fly. Like when something comes up, you want to jump into it. And that's the most dangerous time to do it because you're emotionally primed to erupt, and it's not going to be good for your marriage. So what I would encourage you to do is think right now. Stop and pause this if you need to. As soon as this is done, write down some things you've been wanting to talk to your wife about. Maybe it's the Amazon boxes in the garage that she keeps piling up. Maybe it's the way she's doing certain things. Maybe it's something sexually you're not getting that you need that's causing you to get frustrated and want to say mean things or get distracted with your eyes in other places. Whatever it is, write those things down and look to set an opportunity to have that conversation in a healthy way. Working through these conflicts will help you operate on the same wavelength. It'll help you operate in a much more unified way. Your communication will be better. Your sex will be better. Your friendship will be better. Get on the same page. Learn to work through disagreement with discussion instead of elevating into argument. Let me know how this worked for you. Give me some comments. Let me know what you thought. Ask some questions. Share this with a friend. Subscribe. And I will see you guys on the next episode.